Whatever happens, we always want to believe that with time, people change for the better and that even the cruelest criminal can become a good person. But unfortunately, life keeps convincing us otherwise. And a wonderful example of that is the story of Jack Unterweger, a psychopath and famous writer who tricked the whole world and who was the topic of this release of Histographics. The life story of Johann Unterweger, known to the world as Jack, begins with the typical tale of a serial killer. In 1950, after a brief love affair with an American soldier, a certain Austrian woman by the name of Teresa gave birth to a son. Some sources claim that she worked as a bartender and waitress, others that she was a prostitute. It was not her lot to become an exemplary mother. While she was still pregnant, the woman had to serve time in prison for fraud. She was released not long before her son's birth, although 3 years later she ended up in prison again. Little Jack was sent to be raised by his sole remaining relative, his grandfather. The 3-year-old boy had to not only change families, but also to move from the town of Graz to Carinthia, in another part of Austria. The changes were no improvement, and in his new family, Jack became a burden once more. As Unterweger himself would later write in his autobiography, his grandfather was an alcoholic and a very cruel person. In his grandfather's mind, an upbringing consisted mainly of beatings. When he was slightly older, Jack started spending more time on the streets. Without a normal upbringing and the necessary education, the young man gradually turned into a criminal. While he was still a teenager, Unterweger was convicted of theft, pandering, and sexual assault 16 times. But after some time, these sorts of offenses stopped satisfying him. In 1974, he committed his first murder. 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer became the serial killer's first victim. As many sources claim, the girl had earned her living as a prostitute. It's most likely that Unterweger said he wanted to make use of her services, and when the two of them were alone, the killer strangled Margaret with her own brassiere. The case was cracked almost immediately because a witness had seen them together. Appearing before a court, Jack said that he had killed the girl because she reminded him of his mother. In the end, Unterweger was sentenced to life in prison, and this, strange as it sounds, was the start of his artistic career. After getting to know the prison's procedures, Jack decided to take advantage of the prisoner rehabilitation program. First, he filled in the gaps in his education. Coming from the streets, he was now practically illiterate. Having learned to read and write fully, Unterweger suddenly discovered he had a flair for literature. Jack started writing short stories, plays, and even poetry. But his main artistic triumph was his autobiography, Purgatory, or The Trip to Prison, Report of a Guilty Man. The book was published in 1983 and quickly became a bestseller. Unterweger's fame spread far beyond the prison walls. The popularity of his literary work grew so steadily that soon the prisoner started reading his writings on the radio, straight from prison. And Alfred Kollrich, editor of the respected Austrian journal Manuscript, even came to his prison personally to hear Jack's works as he read them. And this was just the beginning. After some time, the Australian intelligentsia, inspired by Unterweger's talent, made a collective request for him to be released before his sentence had finished. The most well-known and respected people from the artistic world stood up for him. Writer Günter Grass and playwright Elfriede Jeniling numbered among them, for example. The first attempt at freeing Unterweger proved to be unsuccessful. In 1985, the Austrian president denied their request in reference to the fact the minimum sentence issued by the court stood at 15 years. 5 years later, however, social pressure all the same convinced authorities that it was necessary to release the murderous writer. And on the 23rd of May 1990, Jack Unterweger left prison. Literally in the first few days after his release, he became the pride of the nation and a shining example that rehabilitation can work. Appearing on various talk shows as a guest, Unterweger repeatedly declared that writing his book had saved him from his inner demons. And now he was a completely different person. Jack's works were taught to children in Austrian schools and often played on the radio. He would also perform in front of an audience himself, reading his own writings. Besides that, Unterweger also worked as a reporter for the ORF Broadcasting Company. As it later turned out, several times in his reports, he told viewers about cruel murders that he was responsible for. Unterweger confirmed that rehabilitation could be successful in every regard. He drove a Ford Mustang convertible, wore expensive clothing, and was even in a relationship with a girl. While carrying out his duties as a reporter, he quite often had to talk with police representatives, but never felt any sort of tension. It seemed like he'd changed for good. In 1991, one Austrian journal hired Unterweger as a special correspondent. The publication wanted to prepare a series of materials on crime in Los Angeles and sent Jack on a business trip there. Arriving there, the man started working alongside local police. He even walked down to the red light district with officers to get to know what the level of prostitution was like in Los Angeles. The police didn't suspect that Unterweger had more than a professional interest in this trip. Soon, the Los Angeles police started receiving reports of missing girls, and as it turned out, all three girls, Sherry Ann Long, Shannon Exley, and Irene Rodriguez, were prostitutes. After some time, the girls' bodies were discovered. They all appeared to have been brutally raped and choked with their own brassieres. Investigators didn't even consider the thought that Unterweger, who had spent nearly all his time in the USA in the company of police officers, could have anything to do with the current murders. The reporter calmly held an interview with the head of the city's police, Max Edelbacher, and saw how they found the bodies of his victims one after the other. At this time, reports of dead bodies had also started appearing in Austria. Local police had discovered the bodies of several prostitutes who had disappeared several months before. The mark was the same. All the victims had been raped and had then died after being suffocated with their own underwear. When Jack returned from the USA, the Austrian police were already investigating him as the main suspect in the murders, although law enforcement didn't manage to apprehend him immediately. After discovering that they were planning to accuse him of the murders, Unterweger went on the run. He changed location constantly, so police from various countries got involved in hunting down the criminal. But even as a fugitive, the man managed to get in touch with the Austrian media several times to publicly proclaim his innocence. Jack avoided detection for a long time. He fled through several European countries, Canada, and the US, and only on February 27, 1992, did Miami police manage to apprehend Unterweger. Due to bureaucratic procedures, the madman's trial took place only after 2 years in June 1994. Unterweger was accused of murdering 11 women. In the process of the investigation, it was revealed that Unterweger was active not only in Austria and the US, but also in the former Czechoslovakia. 2 more victims of rape were discovered there. In the end, a jury found Jack guilty of 9 murders. The court couldn't prove the man's connection to the other 2 deaths due to a lack of evidence. The sentence was carried out on June 29, 1994. With regards to the degree of his punishment, Jack Unterweger was given life in prison without the right to parole. Nevertheless, a huge amount of irrefutable proof couldn't convince or prove to certain people that Unterweger was a murderer. That day in the courtroom, Jack's admirers were also present beside his accusers. They all met the sentence with tears. The people simply refused to believe that their idol could commit such acts. Jack killed himself that same night. After arriving at Graz Carlisle prison, the man hanged himself in his cell using the cord from his tracksuit bottoms. His death meant that delivering his appeal was impossible, and because of this, the sentence issued to Unterweger never actually came into effect. His death didn't grant Jack total oblivion. His contradictory nature continued to attract people later on. Writers, journalists, and directors occasionally turned to Unterweger's image and life story in creating their works. In 2008, for example, John Malkovich put on the show Seduction and Despair, the plot of which was based on Unterweger's biography. After the show's successful premiere in Santa Monica, California, the director changed the title to The Infernal Comedy. The production was shown with this title in 2009 in Venice and afterwards went on to other countries too. In 2015, a film called Jack was shot by director Elizabeth Charang, telling the story of the famous killer. And in 2016, the film Entering Hades was announced in the USA. Michael Fassbender agreed to play Unterweger himself in it, but the project was never finished. Writers for TV shows didn't pass over the murderous writer's story either. The process of his international manhunt became the basis for one episode in the second season of The FBI Files. Unterweger's case was also of great interest to the American writer John Leake. The author spent a whole 6 years in Venice for the purpose of gathering material for his book. He studied newspaper archives and police archives in detail, personally spoke with people related to the Unterweger case, and piece by piece collected all the information he needed. The sum of 6 years of his labor was a documentary novel entitled Entering Hades: The Double Life of a Serial Killer. In the book's 91st chapter, the author describes the life and personality of this contradictory man in great detail, drawing parallels to other serial killer stories and trying to understand what goes on inside the minds of such people. The book was published in 2007 and to this day remains one of the most comprehensive descriptions of Jack Unterweger's story. The contradictory and intriguing story of this murderous writer became one of the most important pages of criminal history in Europe and the world. Not a single expert, however, could precisely answer this question. How could two very different sides of one personality coexist in the same person? Would you read the works of a writer if you knew that he was a real killer? Share your opinion in the comments, subscribe to our channel, and leave a like. Till the next video.